5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
According to IDC research, 30% of IT jobs will be left unfilled by 2022. Many IT organizations are already feeling the pinch, and CIOs are advised to step up their skills development and leadership retention strategies in order to compete. I'm Tom McDonald with the CIO Executive Council, and that's just one of the key predictions we'll be discussing in today's special edition of IDC's Worldwide CIO Agenda 2019 Predictions Report. The Council is live streaming today's session on Twitter at CIO Online, and if you're listening live, you can post any questions or comments you might have by using the hashtag IDCFuturescape. And now joining me today to talk about the report and walk us through the implications of it is Joe Pucciarelli. He's the IT Executive Advisor and Group Vice President at IDC. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate you inviting me over. You know, this is frankly the time of year I enjoy, and one of the things I enjoy, which different from some people, is it's a time to sit back and reflect, look at the roads we've traversed and the road that's ahead. And as you know, that aligns perfectly with what we're going to do in our session in the next hour. What we intend to do, what I intend to share with the folks that are joining us today, is our view of the road ahead. And what I want to focus on in particular are some of the opportunities, some of the risks, and some of the low bridges they might want to look out for. Before we do that, though, I want to just talk for just a second about one of the dialogues that's going on on Wall Street right now. And I think it's worthy of us pausing for a minute to reflect on it.
Sure.
You know, if you stand back in the context of the last couple of hundred years and you look at how the stock market's performed, even in the last 100 years, the last 25 years have been exceptional in terms of the growth in the market. And a lot of people in the stock market community or the stock analysts are saying, is that an anomaly or is that something that's going to continue? And you know, that whole question we think is a really interesting question. If you look back and you say, well, what drove a lot of the changes in the last 25 years? And it's hard to remember that in 25 years we've gone from most people didn't have cell phones to there's 3.5 billion of them in the world. We have Facebook, we didn't have Facebook. We had iPods, we had digital music. Netflix is now a totally electronic and digital service. You know, we have enterprise ERP in most of our large organizations. And it's just as short as 25 years ago, we didn't have any of those things. So it's easy to look back and say, well, from the perspective of today, we can see how, you know, these things have changed the world. The question is, what's in front of us? Will the next 25 years see that kind of innovation? And how will that innovation affect the outcomes of companies and organizations and ourselves and our own professional careers and our own personal careers? When we look out at IDC, we think that the next 25 years actually might be even more innovative than the last 25 years. You know, you think about things like AI becoming part of everything. And you say that and it's like, oh yeah, I've heard all that before. But what you got to remember is that in the next 25 years, the next 7 years, we're going to be able to put enough computing power on a single chip that it's going to be possible to put AI in practically everything. And I'm not even able to project how that's going to affect our world. At IDC, we've coined a term for this. We call this multiplied innovation. And when we looked out at the predictions and we looked out at the market and the various conditions, that's really the context that we looked at is, you know, what is coming in terms of this exponential path that we have been on, and is it possible that that exponential path is going to continue? Now, a lot of the folks that are joining us today and folks that are listening to this replay are going to have the ability to reflect and say, well, yeah, we're doing that. Our organization is doing a lot of really interesting things, and I visit clients all over the world, and you know, there's more similarities than there are differences, and that's what I find so exciting. You know, I was recently, I ran an innovation conference for a group of CIOs in Prague, and there was no difference. The names of the companies were different, but they're working on the same issues that clients are working on in Portland, Oregon, where I was in October talking to CIOs. So, you know, it's with that thought that I would encourage, you know, our colleagues that are joining us today to just pause for a second, use this as an opportunity to reflect think about and anticipate what's coming in front of us.
Well, it sounds like a real optimistic view as opposed to the lack of resources that I cited earlier here. So that's great to hear.
Okay, well, with that thought, I want to get going. I want to take a look. This is, if you could take the whole presentation and put it in one slide, this would be the slide. You know, sometimes when we create PowerPoint slides, we create them for presentations in an auditorium, and sometimes we create them for, you know, printing out as an outline. And this presentation was created really as an outline for people. And of course, it'll be available for download for folks that want it. So, and I'd encourage them to do so. One of the things that we did as part of our forecasting process is we looked at 3 factors. The first question is, of course, what's the time frame? Are we talking about something that's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years out? When is that issue going to become a mainstream issue that our colleagues that are joining us today should be thinking about when they thread that into their business plans? The second question is, you know, what are the implications in terms of the cost and the complexity? How much disruption, how much opportunity is that topic going to create? So as we go through the predictions today, I'm going to share what we think the impact and the time frame is of each of these predictions. So I'm going to go to our next slide here. One of the things that folks ask me is they say, so when you do these predictions, so what about the process?
Right.
And I want to just talk about that methodology
Great.
a little bit. You know, this isn't a bunch of people sitting and kind of slinging stuff at the walls. It's actually a much more structured brainstorming session, okay? It's brainstorming, but it's brainstorming that's structured. The way we structure it is we start by creating a separate stream of research, which, by the way, is also going to be available for folks today. What we do is we create an outlook of what are going to be the main drivers for society and technology for the next 5 to 7 years, okay? Now to do that, we use what's called a PESTLE plus B framework. PESTLE plus B. And PESTLE stands for political, economic, social, et cetera, plus business, okay? So we're looking at all the different facets. The materials that I'm going to share with you are really based on these 7 criteria that are up on the chart. Mm-hmm. In terms of the issues that we think are most impactful for our CIOs, first of all, we think that we're at the next phase of digital transformation, of new digital strategies. And what it's about is it's about technology-driven transformation. And why it's different this time? It's not just technology that it's accelerating existing processes. It's about technology and creating new ways of accomplishing things, new ways of doing things. And I'm going to mention it a couple of times today, but I think one of those that's a great example is 3D printing, right? Because 3D printing, you're literally creating something in the physical world from something in the digital world.
Right.
So, you know, we talk about digitization. The next phase is going to be the actual transition between the digital and the physical. We're seeing a race to innovate worldwide. It doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't matter the sector. It touches all of us, it touches government. You want to have, you know, some of my colleagues were in Barcelona 2 weeks ago at the Worldwide Conference on Smart Cities. What you see going on in the municipal space right now is really exciting. It's how to engage and support their constituents in new and more effective ways. It's how to take cost out of the system and at the same time improve service and customization. The next factor is we're seeing new technology platforms being put in. And there's a broad spectrum of them, whether it's to manage the inputs from something like you know, Internet of Things or IoT technology. How are you going to capture all that information and then use it in a productive way? At the end of the day, it's all about taking data and turning it into value, as we all know.
Right.
That's really what this fourth one is, which is sense, compute, and actuate. It's about not informing. It's not about creating data that's nice to know. It's about creating data that will shape business decisions, will cause an organization or a person or a team to change their direction. if as CIOs, if as technology executives, we can provide our people with those kinds of tools, we're going to help them multiply their rate of innovation. The next is the new nature of risk, right? You said I was being an optimist. The world is, there's two sides, right? And the reality is that we live in a world with new threat vectors, and we're going to have more threat vectors coming at us that we never anticipated. One of my favorites is was it a year or two ago, that casino that got hacked in Vegas. And supposedly they got hacked by somebody that came in through the application that manages a fish tank. Okay, and there's parallels with that, with what we saw with some of the retail chains that had problems, right? People came in through some obscure gateway that was being used to monitor or manage the HVAC system, right? So, yeah, it's great when we digitize everything and connect it, but we create, new points of threat and new points of risk. And the reality is we as professionals are going to have to manage that. The future of work is changing. I was listening this morning on my way to work. I was listening to a really interesting, provocative piece, and they were talking about how companies are recruiting and identifying freshman undergrads that they intend to follow through secondary education and then recruit into the workforce. Now, there was a time when we would do that with athletes, right? Right, you'd be looking for that next wide receiver, that next quarterback, that next, blindside guard.
That's exactly what I was thinking of when you mentioned that, yeah.
Right, but we're doing that now for the young people that have the potential to move the needle with AI. And I mean, to me, that just captures so much of the points I've mentioned above. The speed with which digital strategies are taking off, the rate of innovation, the stakes that are involved, the pace of innovation. And finally, the other counterposing force to this. The reality is that, it's the old joke about, how long does it, it took only 7 days to create the world, and that's because, there was no installed base, right? The reality is that many of our organizations have layers and layers of complexity, layers and layers of systems. They've got strong institutional cultures that thrived under a particular set of circumstances, right? And our world is changing, so how are they going to evolve to take advantage of the opportunities in the new world order? So, a lot of discussion. The point is that our predictions were founded with this kind of dialogue. And again, I'd encourage the folks on the line, this report, which is actually in PowerPoint format, so it's easier to digest, is also available for download as part of the discussion today. So I don't know, what do you think about that? Does that resonate with you?
I think it's a terrific way to drill down on it, and the political aspects of it is, I find, very interesting. I would imagine in today's day and age, the politics around the world, the nationalism, all these other things, does that actually play into what you're thinking about, and what are the drivers of the future?
It has to, right? We see nationalism, we see globalism. In the next breath, the level of trade between the various countries has never been higher.
Right.
So, I look out at the world and I say, I'm going to focus on the technology implications. While the political and economic domains I find fascinating, I'm going to focus on my knitting, which is understanding how those factors shape and impact the community.
I do know that council members are very interested in turning data into value. We hear that a lot. Like, how can we have all this data, we do something with it, but what else can we do with it? And how can we really drive that forward?
I will, and I'm going to take the bait on your comment, and I'll make just one comment about an application of technology that 10 years ago seemed like space age, even 15 years ago seemed like space age, which was, people in the energy industry were creating three-dimensional digital maps of underground rock strata. And they were using that to shape drilling, and they were using that to shape mining. And at the time it sounded like something that was kind of otherworldly. And I remember having dialogue with clients within the past 25 years about that. Look at how that, which became manifest with the term we now call fracking, which has it's kind of a loaded term. Some people view it as positive, some people view it as negative, and I'm just going to talk about the technology implications. The combination of that ability to build these highly detailed three-dimensional digital maps underground non-invasively, and the invention of a steerable drill bit has basically changed the mining industry. I was on the phone earlier this week with our senior analyst who leads our mining practice. And that industry is going headlong into digitization. And you know, if any industry, you'd say, well, how could mining be digital? And the answer is absolutely. If you can look digitally instead of having to drill and excavate and remove rock strata, that's orders of magnitude less expensive. So
Successful ones are digitizing.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. So with that, I'm gonna take us to our first set of predictions. What I'd like to do is, when we talk about the predictions, we've actually paired, there's 10 predictions, and we've paired them 2 on each page. And that's because when we look at what makes CIOs successful, we think there's really 3 criteria that drive CIOs worldwide and make them successful. The first is the obvious one. They have to be competent. They have to be able to execute at a very high level of effectiveness. Okay, those are table stakes, right?
Yep.
Once upon a time, that was differentiating, but worldwide, that's a table stake. The second criteria, and the one that we see as the real differentiator, is those individuals who are able to execute change and do so across an enterprise. Change on a scaled basis, not on just an individual basis. The ability to achieve outcomes through change is a differentiating characteristic worldwide that companies will pay a premium for and that they value, an individual who can move the needle. The third criteria that we see when we talk about what makes a successful an IT executive, IT leader, CIO, is the ability to keep in their mind 2 conflicting ideas which seem to contradict each other, a paradox, okay? And this first set of predictions is a classic case of a paradox, right? The prediction is that by 2021, 4 years out, driven by line of business needs, 70% of CIOs will deliver agile connectivity via APIs and architectures that interconnect digital solutions from cloud vendors, system developers, startups, and others. So what we're talking there about is connecting the enterprise and making it more permeable, right? Every time we put another access point, we're actually creating potentially more risk. Now, counterposing that is a need for a prediction, prediction number 3, which is AI governance. By 2022, 2/3 of enterprises will task CIOs to transform and modernize governance policies to seize the opportunities and confront new risks posed by AI, machine learning, data privacy, and ethics. So on one hand, there's this imperative to enable the enterprise to structurally interconnect and share. That's an imperative, right? And you can look, doesn't matter the industry, the strength is being part of an ecosystem, being a differentiating member of that ecosystem. And on the same token, by being part of that more open ecosystem, there's new risks. The technology poses new risks. So for CIOs, the thing that we would recommend in terms of the first prediction, we would recommend creating centers of excellence with their colleagues in the line of business, not just IT. As you think about creating this world of agile connectivity, it's not just what IT thinks, it's what the line of business thinks, because increasingly the technology is domiciled out in the business. In terms of the AI governance, we think that the real, very pragmatic thing to do for CIOs is to recognize it's there and to begin focusing on identifying and creating KPIs and metrics, again, that cut across customers, the lines of business, the various stakeholders in the value chain. It's about understanding where the risk points are. And we think that one of the ways to do that is to focus on the creation of meaningful metrics. Next predictions, numbers 4 and 5. Again, there's a paradox, right? Because on one hand, we're talking about over the 4-year period, 75% of successful digital strategies are going to be built on a transformed IT organization, right? We need to continually weed our garden, reinvest. We need to continually manage and rationalize the infrastructure, the applications, and the data architectures. Conversely, on the same line, the paradox is that we think that 80% of IT executive leadership, as soon as 2 years from now, are going to be compensated based on business KPIs and metrics that measure IT's effectiveness in driving the business, their performance, growth, and not IT operational metrics. In the old days, it would be, what's your uptime? How many help desk tickets did you close? The very mundane metrics that our colleagues in the line of business would hear, and frankly, they'd roll their eyes because they really didn't understand. Should the number be higher or lower? How is it relevant? The answer is you're seeing a lot of organizations looking for the expression and the delivery of IT in the context of business outcomes. So on one hand, there's a need for us to rationalize our infrastructure, but it can't be for its own sake. It has to be tightly linked to business outcomes in a way that can be measured and demonstrated. And oh, by the way, what better way to do it than to really sit back and rethink the KPIs that we as technology leaders are using to explain to our colleagues in the line of business why we're doing these things and why it's relevant to them. Mm-hmm. So are you seeing that in some of the things that you're in your world, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. I know the KPI, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are in terms of CIOs being measured on the business metrics and how they might react to that. It's a more of a challenge for them. I would think in most cases it probably is, and if they haven't got themselves to be a business savvy technologist at this point, to make sure they're impacting the business and what they're doing is actually providing value to the business and not just saving money on the IT side. But we definitely have seen that CIOs are more interested in what's going on for the business. That's the end result they're trying to impact.
So imagine if we worked in a retail operation that had an online shopping capability. And the statistics on abandoned shopping carts are very, very interesting, right? Because somebody came to the website, shopped, invested time, and then left something parked in a basket. Right? So as a retailer, that must be something that would drive you crazy, right? I got them in the door, I got them interested enough to reach and touch and engage, but they didn't close the deal. Now imagine if what we did is we compensated those individuals responsible for web design with a metric about abandoned shopping carts, because abandoned shopping carts, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them could be, well, it was just too complicated of a process, right?
Right.
Why did you abandon it? Well, it took me 11 steps to check out. I wanted to check out in 2. Mm-hmm. And again, we can debate that. It's a very complicated domain. But when we talk about measuring performance in terms of business outcomes, that would be an example of what we at IDC think the world is going to be for technology leaders. Much tighter integration with the business and an accountability for business outcomes, not just providing the platform in which the business operates on.
Perhaps another challenge for CIOs, I guess.
As always, right? Our world is continual. So let's go to predictions number 7 and 9. And again, the paradox. We see a fundamental change occurring in how IT organizations are operating. Forever, the beginning and the end at IT was about projects, right? How many projects do we open? How many projects are in the backlog? What's the success rate of projects? And on and on and on. So what we're seeing is we're starting to see some of the leading bright lights in the IT world rethink their IT organizations and take some of their resources and actually begin creating product teams. So an IT product team. So again, I'll use the example of the retailer. So, we were aware of one organization, and they had 10 major projects. Now, by the way, they were a bricks and virtual organization. So they had a lot of retail establishments, and they also had a robust online digital business. Now, in the physical world, the rule of thumb is you have to renovate a store at least every 5 years, right? That by doing that, you drive new store traffic. Customers come in, they see a nice, bright, shiny store that encourages them to come and shop and take things off the shelf and put them into the cart, hopefully check out. So the point is, in this company, there was a need for investment on physical assets, because you have to keep investing every year in order to maintain your portfolio. And there was also a need to invest in the virtual, right, to build out a digital capability. Long and the short of it is they ended up looking at their top 10 projects list. And of the top 10 projects list, 4 of them involved checkout. They were going to build a better checkout for their retail customers. They were going to build a better checkout in the store for their commercial customers. They were going to work on the checkout for self-checkout. And then they had a 4th project, believe it or not, for checkout on the web. Now, somebody looked at that and said, we got to be able to do better. Then 4 of our top 10 spending initiatives are all checkout. And of course, there was a better way. And the executives in that organization looked around and said, we're going to take and form a checkout product team. Because as long as we're in the retail business, we're going to be checking people out. And the ability to do so quickly and seamlessly and easily is going to be a business differentiator for us as long as we are in business. So instead of tasking people to work on checkout in one of the various domains, it's a question of they want people to go home at night and come in the morning and have all of their waking energy focused on improving checkout. And that's one of the driving changes we see in IT. Counterposing that is the need for agility, right? If you pick the wrong things to invest your people on, then how are you going to maintain agility? We think over the next 3 years, 2/3 of CIOs are going to expand their agile DevOps practices into wider business to achieve velocity necessary for innovation, execution, and change. So I want to just pause, and I don't know if you realize the bomb I'm kind of throwing with that. What we're starting to see is a phenomenon we've called BizOps. So it's not just enough that we task our software teams to go faster or our broader IT teams to go faster. We need the whole enterprise to go faster. And by the way, if you talk to businesses that have tried Agile and it hasn't been entirely successful, they'll tell you that's because it's very difficult to have an Agile IT practice with a business that still has a waterfall practice, for example, in product marketing. Okay, you've got to have the whole team operating with the same set of expectations and accountabilities.
We actually had a debate on one of our webcasts about that in terms of the Agile. Can you be all in? Do you have to be all in on an Agile, or could you be part of the way? And there was both sides of the coin. Some said you had to be all in because how can you work with that other part of the organization if they're not following suit? And others said, well, certain parts of our organization will never be Agile.
It's again one of those areas where we could have a wonderful debate, and I think that there's clearly multiple sides to the equation. When we talk to our clients and we ask them why their Agile initiatives aren't succeeding, that's why. It's because of the discontinuities between the organizations. So when we ask the question of whether or not you're all in on Agile, what we would say is maybe the entire enterprise isn't all in on Agile, but the entire division or team or initiative or focus needs to be all in, not just IT, but also our colleagues in the line of business. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So with regards to recommendations, we think that in terms of the product approach, we would encourage our folks participating to adopt a goal-driven adaptive IT governance model to empower teams by granting authority to shape products and services to meet their enterprise and their customer requirements. In other words, it's got to be an adaptive IT enterprise if you're going to go with an IT product approach. I can tell you I've had a lot of dialogue with a lot of our clients, and this is not an obvious answer to a lot of organizations. They look at it, they struggle, especially if they're not an organization with 4,000 people in IT, right? They don't have enough resources to put individual people on every product team or project. So it's about how do you do that while leveraging resources. In terms of the expansion, I know I'm sounding a bit repetitive, but we think that Agile governance is best measured, is best achieved through a systematic approach in terms of metrics. We think that an awful lot of organizations have rushed into the burning building, have rushed to the scene, and haven't sat down and thought about some of the process work, right? And metrics and KPIs, well, they're part of the process work, but we think they're part of the process work that actually makes change stick, right? Because, I mean, again, if you've done any work in, I don't know if you've done work in this domain, my storied career, which is more like a bad bus schedule, I've had the opportunity to actually be in production, be in large manufacturing facilities. I'm talking 25,000 people. If you measure something that's working really well, and all you do is you instrument it, and people know that you've instrumented it, you'll pick up roughly 10% productivity improvement just because people know you're measuring something, even if it's working great.
Right.
Now, if you measure something that's hosed up, you could pick up 20, 30 points of efficiency because then there's something that actually needed to be worked on. So this whole notion about metrics, it's not just about reporting, but it's about individuals striving to achieve excellence, right? People are competitive. They want to do a good job most of the time. Most of the people, most of the time, want to do a good job.
Especially if they know they're being measured.
Well, and when they're being measured, then that's exactly the point, right? They're being held accountable.
Right.
So when they're being held accountable, they know somebody's looking. They're going to say, hey, I want to make sure I get in the green zone on that. I want to, I'd like our team to be the best. So as we reflect on this prediction, we think that the product orientation aligns IT better to customer needs because it's not just this, we're going to go in, we're going to fix it, and then we're going to go off and work on something else. But there's a sense of ownership and participation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to move us along. The next two predictions, again, the paradox is automation of IT, potentially even with AI, versus the need for increased resilience. The prediction is that compelled to curtail IT spending, improve enterprise IT agility, and accelerate innovation, 70% of CIOs will aggressively apply data and AI to IT operations, tools, and processes over the next 2 years. So it's inevitable. CIOs know that, we always need to have our house in order when we go and we ask others to give at the well, right? And it's been a practice. If you look just at the last 10 years, the improvements collectively we've made in terms of our IT operations practices and the amount of resources that we've taken out of that area and still are achieving significant outcomes. The virtualization of our environments has allowed all kinds of new efficiencies. So there's a lot of things that we have done. People are saying, well, but how can we do more? And the answer is, there are going to be new opportunities to do more. We've all, I would say all, many of us have put a toe into the water of knowledge management, right? We've come out of knowledge management, we've scratched our head and said, did this really work? They struggle to demonstrate positive outcomes. The concept is indisputable, right? It's the application of it that we've all seemed to struggle with. When you start having things like AI, where you have just this, I don't want to say infinite compute power, but extremely inexpensive compute power, it allows you to begin doing a lot of funky things that you couldn't otherwise do before. We think that those new techniques, the application of these technologies in-house to IT are going to, they're going to change us. They're going to change the world. As an example, one of the car companies took all of the engineering specs to make a suspension component. And they ran that through an AI algorithm. So, when we think about a suspension component, we all have a mental picture jumps to mind, and sort of stamped steel, and there's a set of parts that are familiar to many of us. What the AI output, when you couple AI with additive manufacturing, 3D printing, the part that came out looked like something from an Aliens movie. Okay, it didn't look anything like a suspension component, and that's because the AI algorithm optimized it for the minimum amount of material to meet the specified forces and impacts that component was going to have. I think that's what we're going to see in IT when we start applying AI to things like tracking a retail customer's path through retail store, or the path through a website. We're doing a lot of that now. We're starting to do that, and the leading edge companies are already applying that. As that technology becomes more mainstream, I'm very positive. I don't know where it's going to go. The one thing I'm sure of is that there are going to be outcomes that I don't think any of us would rationally predict. I don't think you'd sit here and say, I'm going to take 10% out by doing that. The design of that suspension component used something like 35% of all of the material that a normally manufactured component used, 35%. So in other words, there was a 65% savings in material. So that's the kind of changes that change the world, that move the needle. Counterposing that is the need for more IT resilience. And when we talk about resilience, it's not just protecting the enterprise. The reality is that if the world that we operate in, most organizations have experienced either minor, medium, or significant hiccups. The question isn't, am I going to have a hiccup? It's what am I going to do about it? How am I going to respond?
Right.
And when we talk about resilience, that's what it's all about. We think that by 2020, 60% of CIOs will initiate a digital trust framework that goes beyond preventing cyber attacks and enables organization to resiliently rebound from adverse situations, events, and effects. That's what we think the energy is going to be. You know, in the old days, we would talk about a disaster recovery plan. I want people to think beyond a disaster recovery plan. Think about it in the context of a strategy to move forward. It's not just, can I fix where I was, but it's, how do I stand up from something that I never would have anticipated? You know, you go back a few years ago when the hackers broke into the movie studio, right? There have been how many instances of hackers getting into hotels or hospitals or government agencies and locking people out because the digital locks that were used weren't secure. So it's about thinking about what those implications are and kind of jumping over the complexity of the existing systems and saying, how are we going to make this real? How are we going to do something about it? Any thoughts on that, Tom?
Well, I know, in terms of the human part of the equation when talking AI, that's one of the questions we had come through is, how does that affect the humans in terms of jobs, in terms of creativity, things like that?
The nature of work is going to change.
Yes.
There isn't any doubt that the nature of work is going to change. If we look at the history of automation, right? We started out, the old famous prediction that the world would only need 10 computers, right? Of course, that just seems so silly to say it now. It seems almost ridiculous. Computers liberated people from doing a lot of clerical work. Most people forget where the term computer came from. We used to have large open suites. People would be sitting at desks, maybe with calculators or not, and tabulating long rows of numbers or calculating paychecks. And those people were called computers. The people who computed the numbers were called computers. And when the electronic devices came along, well, the name shifted. I'm of the opinion we're going to see an explosion of work. I think we're going to see, I gave you a couple of examples. There are people who spend their careers optimizing websites. I think that the nature of how that's going to be done is going to vastly change. Is it going to reduce the need for people to optimize websites? It's actually the opposite. Every website's going to have to be optimized, right? It's not just the 10 largest retail operators are going to have the ability to use these sophisticated tools, but those tools are going to be able to be used by mid-sized companies with normal means. That's where I think the fallacy is where people say, well, all these jobs are going to be impacted. Well, they're going to be impacted, they're going to change, but there's going to be creation of a lot more jobs. People talk about automating, have self-driving trucks. Well, I've never seen a self-driving truck take inventory as the material is offloaded the truck and sign off the manifest, okay? It may be able to move from point A to point B, but it's going to change the nature of warehouse operations. It's going to change the nature of how the receipt of goods is certified. So in the shipping world, when you ship a shipload of grain, okay? You load grain onto a bulk freighter and you ship it from here to there. The way that works is there's a trusted agent comes onto the ship and actually weighs, and not weighs, but determines the volume and weight of the dry cargo. And then an agent from that company actually is at the port where the ship is received and measures again to see that all the grain, in the example I'm using, that was put on the ship actually arrived at the port. So there's a trusted agent. There's some very large companies with tens of thousands of people who do that. Right now we don't have that with goods shipped by truck.
Right.
Are we going to need that? I don't know. Well, I don't think we can put a person at each depot, or at each retail installation, but how are we going to accomplish that? That's going to create a need for a whole new type of certification, which hasn't even been invented yet. So I'm very much a disciple of reading the history of technology. As you know, there's been many predictions that, we're one turn of technology away from the end of the world. And yet what we keep seeing is that the power and the creativity and the innovation keeps expanding the size of the pie. And I'm very much a disciple of that school of thought.
Well, when you talk about automation, one of the big topics at the council lately has been RPA, robotic process automation.
Sure.
And one of the comments I've heard is it definitely shifts jobs. Jobs can be shifted, but usually it's the menial part of their job that's removed, and we want them to check for exemptions or do that higher level work so they can be relieved of the hours of copy paste type of stuff.
Sure.
And kind of move on to the more thinking work that they need to be doing. And so the jobs will shift. They say that they've created more jobs as a result of that in most cases.
I remember, within the last 25 years, the last big bubble we had of IT was a tremendous shortage of IT jobs occurred in the late 90s, early 2000s, when many companies went onto the internet, okay? And I mean, somebody who could configure a Cisco network switch, you could write your own ticket, right?
Yeah.
And somebody who was an Oracle database administrator, oh my gosh, well, we used to hire people to come in and give them a back massage because we didn't want them to leave, right?
I was in IT staffing. I was dying to place those guys.
Right. Well, exactly,
Right.
right? Well, look what's happened. So Cisco and other network companies have created automation that allows those switches to be configured in a fraction of the time and more accurately. Okay? We've taken enormous amounts of resources that were required to do a job. Has it diminished the strategic importance, the value, the role of network engineers in the enterprise? The answer is no, it's changed it. And that's what I think we're going to continue to see with AI. Now, I don't have the vision to be able to look out 50 years or 40 or even 30 years. In this 7 to 10 year time frame, it's absolutely going to be the automation and elimination of the copy paste jobs, the grunt, horsepower, sweat kind of jobs, where we're asking people to exception manage deviations, provide verifications and trust, managing processes as opposed to actually doing the process themselves.
Right.
So I'm going to take a look at our last two predictions. So again, collaboration and integration versus talent shortage. So by 2023, 70% of CIOs who cannot manage the IT governance, strategy, and operations divides between the line of business dominated edge computing and operational technology, or so-called OT, and IT are going to fail professionally. There's a lot packed into that prediction, and I'm going to talk about that before I move to our final prediction on talent, which you led with, thank you. One of our spent a lot of time talking to a CIO at a major defense company. And in the defense aerospace world right now, it's all about additive manufacturing, 3D printing, okay? I like additive manufacturing better. And I was talking to you earlier before we started about how the frame, the structural frame of the Boeing 787-9, which by the way is made out of titanium, it's the only commercial plane that has a titanium frame. The military planes do, but they're so expensive that they've been prohibitive for use in the commercial sector. Well, Boeing, together with a company called Norsk Titanium out of Norway, created a 3D printing process such that 17.5% of the economic value of the frame of a 787-9 is made out of titanium, okay? I was talking to the CIO at a defense contractor, and I said, well, what are you doing in terms of additive manufacturing? What are you as the CIO doing, and what's your role in helping with that line of, with that technology? He said, you know what, Joe? That line of technology, that initiative is being led by one of our business units on behalf of the enterprise. They're leading additive manufacturing, not me. The IT organization provides the foundation, the data management, the data architecture, the security, and a whole lot of other IT services. But the initiative itself is led by the business, by one line of business on behalf of the enterprise. The point is, he has a clear understanding of what's going on. He's clearly in dialogue with the executives in charge. In the vernacular of a manufacturing industry, that's called OT, operational technology. You see that in utilities. You see that in public works, where you've got manufacturing, oil and gas. You have a lot of these OT applications. Up until now, they operated as two islands because they didn't have to be connected. What you're seeing now is you're seeing a desire to fuse those two environments together to get cost efficiencies. And then how are they managed and maintained? And the answer is that in this example I cited, where you have the aerospace company with the leading 3D printing on behalf of the broader enterprise, it's being led by that executive outside of IT, a technology executive outside of IT who's in consultation with the IT organization. We think that this is actually one of the most significant imperatives over the next 5 years for CIOs in those industries that have OT. Because we think the CIOs are going to be challenged to provide governance and services on behalf of the enterprise, and at the same time allow specific technologies to be clearly led by the line of business and not IT. And boy, in the old days, we used a different vernacular, right? A technology which was not brought into the enterprise by IT was called what?
Shadow IT?
Oh, shadow IT, right? Because we didn't sanction it, we hung that term on it. And maybe long ago that was an appropriate way to describe it, but that's not the world we live in now. Okay, you can't do just about anything without technology. I was in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and I was going through one of these pop-up museums, right? They took an open space and they popped up a museum. And I bought my ticket and I'm waiting in line, and I'm standing there, with my nephew, and we're waiting to go in, and I'm kind of holding the ticket out, and I'm giving a subtle nudge. I want to get into the exhibit, and the guy's like, no, you can't get in yet. I said, well, why is that? They said, well, the fire department has rated this exhibit for only so many people. So we count how many people go into the exhibit and when they exit, and we control the flow of people through the museum that way, through this stand-up museum. So you can't even run a museum anymore without tracking the people, right?
Right.
Counterposing that is talent. We think that through 2022, the talent pool for emerging technologies will be inadequate to fill at least 30% of the global demand, and effective skills development and retention will be differentiating strategies. So the important thing here is it's the emerging technologies. Remember I used the example before about the Oracle database administrators or the Cisco network switch configurers? Well, from 20 years ago, right now that skill you're not going to find. For a database administrator, they're still very much in demand. We haven't been able, we've uprated those jobs, but there's still a lot of art to it. Mm-hmm. The configuration of a network switch has been largely automated through software. It's going to be the folks who can move the needle by working on the emerging technologies. Okay, when you can put artificial intelligence into devices that I can't even imagine having artificial intelligence in, that's when we're going to see the explosion.
Right.
And the combination, what people don't realize, what's going to enable that is very capable, very inexpensive, and very widespread silicon. It's going to be chips that we can put anywhere that have the ability to do this, to have this in them and to do this. And that's really going to be the enabling technology. It's going to be the foundation. It's almost like we're going from having to hand make every brick to being able to have brick factories, right? That's what's going to make it mainstream. So the technology now that runs in 3 to 5 rack servers, you're going to be able to see in one rack, and then eventually you're going to see it into potentially a handheld device or portable device like this, and then a handheld device. So that's what we really think is going to move the needle.
When I hear about that, it makes you wonder, what is the Achilles heel, perhaps, of everything being automated, or everything having a chip in it? I know my father's generation, and himself in particular, didn't want to have everything like Google and everybody reading all his email. He wants to be off the grid that way, but he wants to be able to be on the internet. So he feels like everything being connected is a problem. Mm-hmm. So the Achilles heel of that is it can be a problem because you can get into the fish tank monitoring device. So
sure.
What do you think might be the Achilles heel in the sense that everything is automated and everything has a chip in it and is always connected?
You know, every time we automate, what we do is we eliminate a lot of the random errors, but when an error occurs, it's a bigger problem, right? So instead of having 1,000 small errors, we have one, from our perspective, whopper of an error, mm-hmm. right? That's what we're going to see. Essentially, there's a whole theory, it's called self-organizing critical systems. Systems self-organize, and they get to a certain point of, imagine if we were dropping grains of sand into a pile, right? And the sand was very dry. You could only build the pile of sand so high before the next grain of sand just ran down the top of the pile. Well, if the sand was wet or is damp, you could, of course, stack the sand much higher. And that's what's going to happen with technology. It changes the characteristics of the underlying system, and then what it's going to do is when we have problems, they're going to be more consequential, more widespread. The question is, it's a question of resilience. What have we done to anticipate that, to be able to recover from that? That has to be part of the system design. It's not about, it's like building a car that doesn't have reverse, right?
Right.
You have to assume at some point you're going to have to back up. You're going to have to recover. That's how we see it at IDC, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, I know we're moving along in terms of time. I'm
yes,
sure
we
you've
sure
got
are.
a rich backlog of questions.
All
How
right.
we doing?
We're doing good. I've got one here for you right out of the gate. This goes back to, you were talking about demonstrating change management or change leadership. How can a CIO demonstrate that they're a change leader or a perspective, someone who wants to be a CIO? Because you were talking about how important that is. Any opinions on that, and how you could demonstrate your abilities there?
You know, inside of, dare I say every organization, I'll say most organizations, there are people that are focused on operational excellence, right? I'm going to just keep driving this thing down the road as straight as I can and as fast as I can. But there's also people that are out listening to customers. And they're saying, where's the white space? Where's the disconnect between what we're doing and what customers want, or how we're actually executing? There are colleagues in the line of business. There are change agents that are looking for that opportunity. Find those change agents. If you don't know where to start, have you started doing anything with customer journey mapping? Do you know what it's like when a customer interacts with your organization? One of the financial services companies had a situation. They brought a new CIO in, and his charter was to improve the feel of those systems. Guess what? They were very capable people. They'd been doing systems usage testing for 1,000 years, right? They knew how to do it. He went and he talked to customers. He interacted in it's an electronic brokerage, and they interact with, he actually talked to people. So one of the things he figured out is that in the unfortunate circumstance when there was a joint investment account and one of the joint owners passed away, people characterized dealing with his firm as excruciatingly difficult. It took an enormous amount of time, hours of time. The people on the phone had to flip through ridiculous numbers of screens, something like 75 screens, to accommodate something which is as natural as birth, right? And that's somebody's passing. So they redesigned the system not from the perspective of, is this screen easy to use, but is this process aligned to what a customer needs? So as a CIO, are you talking to customers? When's the last time you were in the field? Seriously, when's the last time you were in the field? Now, there are organizations that are very prideful of the fact that all their executives need to get in the field.
Yep.
I'd say in today's day and age, that would be one of the things that if I was, as an analyst, I'm interacting with my clients, go on to the floor, go and visit customers and find out where the white space is. Because from the customer's perspective, you do not look as good as you do from our own ivory towers, right?
Right. And I do know a lot of our forward-thinking CIOs, they do pride themselves on the fact that they make customer visits. It's part of their
Yes.
routine, and they want to hear from that. So
Absolutely.
I do have a few more if we've
Please.
got a few more minutes here. All right, what advice would you give to someone who is presently in a mid-level tech job to keep pace and prepare for dramatic change in the workplace due to technology advances?
There's number one thing is you need to go and take some night classes on data management, data organization, data architectures, data excellence. It's data everything.
Data.
Right? In the old days, right, what did we talk about? We talked about if you had a problem, you needed what? People, process, and technology, right? At IDC, and at other organizations, we now talk about something called capabilities. And a capability is people, process, and technology. It also is governance, because when you can open up an instance with a credit card and move customer data up to a cloud, you need a governance model. And by the way, what's the data model? We never thought about data models. That's what I would recommend. Invest in yourself and take some courses in data.
Excellent. All right, I got another one. If 70% of CIOs are in danger of failing, does this provide an opportunity for a new type of leader to arise from the business side?
We have seen a lot of technology leaders come from the business side. I gave the example of the aerospace company where you had a technology leader leading their additive manufacturing / 3D printing. That is a terrific example of somebody who may be a logical candidate for the next CIO, right? Because that person is very focused and aligned on delivering technology to achieve market outcomes. I think that is going to continue. I think if you look at the trends, the notion of how individuals grow into CIO positions, it's not so much growing from within now. You'll see people moving through different types of experiences in their careers and going from the business role, a business technologist, to an IT technologist. That's where I see the back and forth opportunity to really sidestep and improve your position in the organization, take on new challenges.
And if you've got that leadership skill, you'll be that C-level person.
Most organizations, not all, but most organizations are pretty ruthless about taking advantage of their people, right?
Right.
And taking their people and getting what they can out of them. So, demonstrating leadership by being aligned to customers and producing business outcomes is a recipe that will get you noticed positively.
Fantastic. So we've only got a couple more minutes here. And if you want to leave us with a final thought, or is there anything in particular you'd like to let everybody know before we close this out today?
I think you asked, one of the questions stood out for me, and the question is, what should I do? We talk about the nature of work changing. We talk about the nature of our world changing. What are you going to do as an individual? What are you going to do for the key individuals who report to you in your organization during 2019 to improve their repertoire of skills to be ready to ruthlessly exploit these new opportunities on behalf of your organization? What are you going to do as a leader? Because if you help the people that report to you, that is the best way to bring the organization along, right? It's hard to get the change filtered down through the layers of organization. I hate to use terms like training because it seems so mundane. It's more profound than that.
Yeah.
It's about changing outlooks, about getting people to look outside the windows, to engage with customers.
More about development.
Yes.
Training, right?
I think that that's what, if we look at the next 3 to 5 years as professionals, that's what I think we have to focus on for ourselves and for the people in our organizations.
Fantastic. I really appreciate your time today, Joe. You're a font of information. We could probably go for another couple of hours, but we need to wrap it up here. And as Joe noted, the CIO Agenda Predictions Report, and as well as another report that he referenced, will be made available to council members as part of your membership. Also, it's great to have the council and IDC join forces today. If you enjoyed that, I suggest you check out our joint offering, Guidant. And Guidant brings together IDC's world-class research and advisory services with the council's community and leadership development resources. And you can check them out at guidantleadership.com. On behalf of the CIO Executive Council and our friends at IDC, thank you for joining us and see you next time.